This is 10 Questions. I'm Andy Johnson. We have a duty to protect and respect refugees and our obligation to open more avenues of support, resettle, and to help them rebuild their lives in dignity. We need greater support internationally from host countries as called for by the Global Compact for Refugees to both access quality education, decent work, healthcare, housing, and social protection. Those were some defining statements in an issue put out by the Secretary General of the of the United Nations, marking June 20th this year as International Refugee Day, World Refugee Day. We have a situation in Trinidad and Tobago. How are we addressing it? Nafiza Mohammed is an attorney with matters in the court as we speak, dealing with those people who come here to Trinidad and Tobago to seek our help and support in this area of humanity. She's our guest in this edition of the program. Good to see you. Good to have you, Nafiza.
Good evening, and thank you very much for having me, Andy.
All right, let me ask you you have a couple of matters on the docket in the courts in Trinidad and Tobago as we speak, treating with people who have come here to seek the help that the UN Secretary General has pointed out that they would need. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Agonizing and sad to know that until this day, we are still not getting it right, because we have to recognize that a refugee is a victim of a situation. A refugee is someone who leaves their home country because of fear for their lives, for their safety, some persecution, for whatever reason, be it political, social, whatever it is. And since 1951, Trinidad and Tobago had signed a treaty all over the world, countries all over the world have had that 1951 Convention on the Status of Refugee signed, and in 1967 there were certain protocols that were added to it, and we in Trinidad and Tobago acceded to this convention way back in 2000. You will recall that there is the Transnational Organized Crime Convention. That is a convention that sets certain basic standards and guidelines for countries all over the world to deal with certain situations that have been arising with the easy ability to move from one country to the next, whether by land, by air, by sea, however it is. When you are crossing borders, you know, there are certain situations that will arise. Now, a refugee who is fleeing their home country, they are leaving, and there are certain cornerstone principles that are recognized worldwide when it comes to refugees. One is the principle of non-refoulement, and the other one is the principle of non-detention. Because you are fleeing and because you fear for your life and your safety, because there are differences in the definitions, all right? A person who lands up in another country, if they declare that they are seeking asylum throughout the world, most countries in the world have certain practices and standards that are applicable. We in Trinidad and Tobago, our Immigration Act is archaic. It was passed in 1969. And we are signatories to the convention dealing with the status of refugees, and we are duty-bound to incorporate certain things in our laws, and it is taking far too long. I think there is a high level of misunderstanding at the highest levels when it comes to these migrant issues. We have to recognize that Trinidad and Tobago, being an island state in the Caribbean, like so many other countries all over the world, we do have an irregular influx of people who are coming into the country and out of the country. We have to build our capacity to determine who are these migrants, what type of migrants are they? And this is where the framework that is recognized through that convention that countries all over the world subscribe to, it does set something, a framework that we ought to be putting in place now, especially.
Right. So let me just read again from what is the sort of some of the protocols that the United Nations has established over the years. It says here, asylum seekers and refugees are protected from forcible return to a country in which their life or freedom may be in danger on account of race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or political opinion. Even if you enter a country without a visa or entry permit, you may not be deported while your asylum claim undergoes a due process of analysis. And they talk about protection and asylum. According to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, any person whose life is in danger in their own country has the right to seek protection and asylum in another country.
So, Andy, therein lies a big problem, because I have had cases to deal with where persons who I know have been registered. You see, the High Commission for Refugees, that is, you know, a worldwide it's a global non-profit organization. It is part of the United Nations system. And in Trinidad and Tobago, that agency relies on the Living Waters community as the chosen
because when there wasn't such an office, the Living Water community had the commission to carry it out. They have been at the forefront from the years now. And the thing about it is that, you know, in terms of persons seeking asylum here, from the time you indicate, or if you are registered with the Living Waters community, there is a procedure that is involved for determining your status as a refugee. And that has to do, there is the UNHCR has an office right around the savannah, and you eventually get a card, which is a form of recognition that you are seeking refugee status in the country. And therefore, that principle of there should not be any forcible returning of that individual to their home country, because I have had cases where persons who have been registered, they have actually been deported. And this is where I think there's a mismanagement of the processes and the systems, because there is a need. You see, there was a refugee unit set up within the immigration division. I think in 2014, there is an ad hoc policy document that was publicized. And when the government changed in 2015, the current Prime Minister indicated that that policy document is also applicable to with the new government that had come in. And from then until now, that policy was builded, it was towards a phased approach for refugee law in this country. We, to this day, do not have a refugee law enacted in our statute book. And I cannot help but wonder why. What is the phobia? What is the fear? Are you fearful that there will be some massive influx? You are wrong, because according to the IOM and other agencies that deal with these migration issues, it is far better for you to put systems in place to manage the process than to leave it unmanaged. And the IOM is the International
Organization for Migration. The IOM and the UNHCR, I know that for some years they have been working in our country. Way back in 2004, I mean, at the time, I know that the IOM, they have done a lot of work with our immigration system and the need for tightening up the borders, the border security issues and management. There was, in fact, a cabinet decision taken in 2006. And you see, those who are in power now would not know of these things because they will not give you an opportunity to be heard on these issues.
Yeah. Do you think it happens sort of vice? Because I've known of at least one case in which somebody who had come from a country in the Middle East, and he was here sort of working with the Living Water community at the time, and he got to be settled in Australia.
I know the guy, an Iraqi, I think he was, and he took 5 years. But the process, and I met the UNHCR people who came every year, they would come into the country. And let me just give you some statistics. When I got back into the AG's office as a legal consultant in 2002, I recall that at that time from the Human Rights Unit, we were aware of just 2 persons seeking refugee status in this country. All of a sudden in 2003, it reached to 35. By 2004, the number had reached to 65. And it was then that I sat around a table with persons from national security and the UNHCR and the Living Waters community. and an ad hoc procedure was developed to deal with these cases. Around that time, if you recall, there was in fact a refugee crisis existing, I think with Haiti and Santo Domingo and those neighboring islands or countries. And
2004, thereabouts.
thereabouts, correct. So that, you know, we were seeing an increase in numbers. It had reached 200 and something by about 2005, thereabouts. And over the years now, I know that certain other issues, because we were signatories, we had acceded to the Transnational Organized Crime Convention. A lot of work was being focused on the trafficking in persons law that needed to be enacted. And in fact, a task force was set up. And by 2009, 2010, there was a draft policy and a bill that was left in the pipeline when the government changed, and that became law. To this day, they have not enacted the Smuggling of Persons Act, which is an integral part. And the Refugee Act is an integral part of that convention as well. So that we are sticking on now, since around 2016, 2017, where we have an actual refugee crisis on our doorsteps with what has been happening in Venezuela. I mean, I just saw some information online that suggested that there are more than 35,000 persons seeking refugee status, all migrants from Venezuela, who would have come across here. So there are inconsistencies with the statistics, with the records, with the information that is out there in the public domain. I am minded to believe the UNHCR's figures. I know that in 2019, when the influx of irregular migrants coming in from Venezuela was so significant, a plaster was put on the sore, figuratively.
Yes, you mean the system by which people were allowed to...
The government tried to stem the tide a bit or to manage it a bit by declaring an amnesty for 2 weeks so that migrants from Venezuela had the opportunity to be registered.
People got registered.
We saw the thousands of people lined up in the blazing hot sun. But the mistake that is being made is the authorities relying on that 16,000 database as if it is the be-all and the end-all. I recall shortly after that exercise, or during the process, concerns were being expressed by refugees themselves, persons who had been registered, they came in as asylum seekers, they had the UNHCR cards, and they were afraid to go and be registered because they were fearful of having to be sent back to their home country, where there was a lot of instability and unrest at the time. People's lives, people who took part in protests, their lives were in danger, and they were fleeing. They were not only coming to Trinidad, they were going to Colombia and other neighboring territories. It's a phenomenon, and countries must be strong enough and sensible enough to recognize that when a person lands up on your shoreline or wherever they enter, because invariably they are fleeing, so they will come in illegally. They wouldn't come with a visa or what have you. They wouldn't have time to get their documents in order. So when you know that they are claiming to be an asylum seeker and they are seeking refugee status, you have to treat with them in accordance with certain best practices that are recognized globally. A refugee, we have to recognize all the time, is a victim of a phenomenon, and they are in need of protection, and hence the reason why, especially when it comes to women and children. You see issues, for example, like health facilities to health, access to health facilities, access to education.
Well, from what my reading, some of it suggests, it lays out access to banking services, to immigration and criminal justice systems.
Correct.
People may apply for permanent residence in Trinidad and Tobago under certain conditions and so on.
Exactly.
I want to come back to what you see as probably the reluctance on the part of those who have to make the decisions. But in the middle of the heights of that issue a couple of years ago, there was a group of people from Cuba who had come, and their position was that they didn't want to stay in Trinidad, but they wanted to be able to benefit from these statements of intent that we have here, to go elsewhere. What has happened? Do you know what has happened with
Well, it's not only from Cuba. I know there are many persons from India, from Bangladesh, different persons who have, people are on the move. In many instances, people are just coming through our country to get out and go elsewhere, in North America, or Canada, or wherever. And because of where we are geographically located, there is that constant influx of people. But from a management point of view, you are far better off to put systems in place. I think one of the mistakes we have made is that we have failed to categorize the migrants, especially those who have come in from Venezuela. When that amnesty was declared, for example, the government had a golden opportunity. You have many persons who left Venezuela for economic reasons. They came looking for a little job to go back or whatnot. Why can't we do something to regularize the situation? And for example, like how when every year the Canadian government advertises that they are recruiting people to come and pick apples in Canada.
Seasonal farm workers
Seasonal
program.
farm workers, and they go and they work for 6 months and come back, and it's well managed. You know who went, you know when they're coming back. They're given a visa for that period of time, and they go and come. And that is what we should have been doing. We have had the pineapple farmers, we have had manufacturers, persons who have indicated their willingness to, absorb some of the capacity, because these people, some of them is really, they just they would like to work and whatnot. Had we been categorizing it, and you have your economic migrants as one category, you could have been working with your different farming association, manufacturers association, and getting some management systems in place to deal with that influx. But when it comes to the asylum seekers and refugees, we are failing miserably, and the authorities are very xenophobic in their approach. I think maybe in recent times there might be a little recognition that, look, you can't just deport them, because I have seen deportation orders signed by former Minister Stuart Young, and even with Minister Hines signing these deportation orders.
And is there not an inconsistency, a definite inconsistency between that and the intentions that we brought into with the convention from 1967?
Definitely, and it's going against all the basic human rights and humanitarian law considerations that other countries around the world recognize. There are certain basic standards that you are expected to comply with, and we just keep embarrassing ourselves with this very xenophobic approach. And I think even now, whether if some training has been done in recent times, I know before 2010, a lot of training was taking place with our immigration officers, customs officers of the state, in national security, in the AG's office, the social services, and what have you. But then, in the last few years, I'm not there, I can't say what's happening, but I am really always, frustrated when I have to deal with clients and immigration. There are some basic things, you just simply having access as an attorney at law to be able to speak to them. At least it could help to eliminate so much. It is no wonder that so many cases have ended up in court, and judgments, the Privy Council would have given judgments against the state in their handling of some of the serious matters.
Your colleague at the bar, Umlala, he took on a matter a couple of weeks ago. I think it was 5 people from the Cameroons who, you saw videos of them. And they got here sort of a roundabout way, and so you know anything about what has happened with it?
I don't know
the progress of it?
Recent situation, but the fact is that we as lawyers, we are confronted regularly with situations. And the sad part, you see, with women and children, I have had to deal with women who were imprisoned in the women's prison in Aruca, women pregnant, women who had little babies. They were locked up for 9 months. For what? For what? And the way how the system is just churning out. Look, this morning I had a matter, and a gentleman incarcerated for 2 years, a little domestic situation. They can't find the virtual complainant. The state has not been ready. And 2 years you want to prosecute a man for something that it is a very minor situation. I had to really, express my concerns in court this morning. It's a grave injustice. And these are migrants. Some of them, they are begging, look, let them be deported instead, rather than having to be locked up in prison. That is the principle of non-detention. And the authorities need to pay attention to what is going on and do a check in the prisons to see how many migrants we have locked up and why aren't they working with the Living Waters community and the UNHCR and trying to streamline the thing.
And in a lot of cases, the people who get sent to the immigration detention center, that ought not to be the case.
That immigration detention center came into being in 2009 only because we had CHOGM and Summit of the Americas. And the way for immigration offenses, how we treat individuals, human beings, they're entitled to certain basic human rights. And you treat them as if they are some common criminals and incarcerating them for long periods of time. This is something we need to revisit. Our country standing in the international arena when it comes to human rights and our humanitarian rights, where we are, it is a decline that has been taking place. And I wish the authorities would stop being so arrogant and listen and try to improve the situation. Our country's image is involved, and I've been embroiled in so many issues where our international standing has been, under this microscope worldwide. You're talking about refugees and the Venezuelan crisis here. We have, and forgive me for raising it again, we have 72 of our own children, citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, and 25 women who are languishing in certain refugee camps in Syria. And they are living in conditions that are, because of the numbers, 70,000 people were in one camp, women and children. These are, when it comes to women and children, they are more vulnerable. And they need urgent protection. Our government needs to do much more than it's doing, and they can get a lot of help if only they would show a willingness to talk to critical stakeholders.
But with that is concerned, I think just after there was a visit here by people from the organization called Human Rights
Watch came.
And
what has happened from then till now?
Well, wasn't there
I have been silent. Let me tell you, I'll be very blunt, because they have tried to silence me in the process. I have behaved myself, and I have been a bit quiet for the last 4 months. Out of the blues, they appointed former Speaker Nizam Mohammed to be the head of a repatriation team.
Edwards, a retired diplomat.
Patrick Edwards, a man with immense experience and somebody who I know could resolve this matter in a matter of days. But does he have the latitude and the authority to do that? And I think that is where the state is sticking. Because you had big PR and things on the front page of the newspapers about the repatriation team being appointed. But was that just intended to be some cosmetics, or is it real? Because I asked the question, where are the women and the children? When are they coming home? If I was very happy that our Prime Minister saw it fit to appoint a team to look at the matter. But I think the composition of the team should perhaps be revisited, and that the relatives are in a position to collaborate with the team, with government officials, and to help to expedite the return of our citizens.
There's no sort of update on any progress report as to what has happened.
I am longing to know what's happening. It has been since March month that repatriation team was appointed. In April, May, June, we heard about big fanciful opening of an office in San Fernando. You think those women and children languishing in the camps could have, they want to know that you're waiting for an office to make this repatriation a reality? What has happened? There are other countries that are involved and are willing, they have indicated their willingness to help to bring citizens back into their country. The NGOs globally are begging governments to take back their citizens.
And then based on the activism of another firm in the legal profession, C.J. Williams and Company.
He has been at the forefront.
And they were working with a couple of cases as well. And what some of the things they shared with me was that in some cases people had signed a statement saying, well, what they would do and what they would activities they would forward.
They have an agreement, that a draft, it's like they call it a civil contract.
Yes.
That if when these children and women return home, that they will comply and be cooperative with whatever has to be done, because their reintegration because of the trauma and all of that that they would have been through. It is recognized that they are going to need some support systems, and there are non-profit organizations in this country willing to assist, so that it's not as though the government is going to be saddled with the responsibility. The Muslim community here has been a vibrant section of our community that has helped to build this country. And regardless of our ideological differences, I'm a very traditional Sunni Muslim. Those persons who went across to Syria, I would say that they probably subscribe to the fundamentalist schools of thought. But notwithstanding that, we have a level of peaceful coexistence, and I have stuck my neck out because I know the suffering and being trained in the field. These are women and children, and we need to expedite the returning of these children and women to our home country. And when they come here, we have enough capacity. We are already way ahead in terms of building capacity to lend support for their resettlement and their reintegration in collaboration with the state.
Yeah, I
but
want to
the
ask you a
state
little bit
needs to
about
talk.
our feelings as a people. Let's put aside the administration and their approach that that is under question. What do you make of the attitudes of some of us as citizens on the matters to where we stand, what our understanding?
You see, our country is a very diverse society, and there has been a high level of Islamophobia that exists in different quarters and you know, all over the world. And, but if it's one thing in our country, I have so much faith and confidence in our citizens. Just look at the Venezuelan crisis. It is our citizens who have been picking up the slack, where the state should have been helping. It is neighbors and Trinidadians, families who have been helping some of these Venezuelan migrants.
In San Fernando and other areas, some people have gone about it to set up schools and kitchens.
Correct. That's who we are. We are people with a heart, and we were always willing to help. And these are our citizens in Syria who begging to come back home, and we're taking too long. I am not here to bash anyone. I was very relieved that the Prime Minister saw it fit. And once that political will was shown from the top, then those in the ministries, they had 4 ministers lined up there. And the AG's office has been stuck on wanting to have legislation to bring them home. You want to criminalize little children, 6-year-old and 7-year-old, and you're so afraid of them that you need legislation to control them, when we have put in place an elaborate child protection modern framework already with new legislation, with the package of children legislation. We have systems already in place. You don't need to criminalize these people unless you have information. If you do the crime, you do the time. Yeah. I am not aware that these children and women have committed any mayhem. Because of their ideological beliefs with the husbands who took them there and whatnot, most of the men have been killed already. How much more punishment you want?
Yeah, but we have to leave it there. Thank you very much, Nafiza Mohammed. The issue is how we as a society, particularly dealing with the question of people who come here looking for that kind of help as refugees or asylum seekers. This has been 10 Questions. I'm Andy Johnson. Thanks for watching. We see you next time.